The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, turning the city streets into a slick, black mirror of blurred neon lights. Emily Turner ran, her breath a ragged gasp in her throat, the sound of her own frantic heartbeat drowned out by the drumming of the rain and the hurried, heavy footsteps splashing through the puddles behind her. It was him. She didn't have to look back to know. She saw the discreet glowing sign ahead. Silence. And without a second thought, she threw her shoulder against the heavy wooden door. It swung inward, and she stumbled into a world of hushed quiet and warm, amber light. The restaurant was nearly empty, a sanctuary on the verge of closing. A few staff members moved silently, polishing glasses and resetting tables for the next day. At a secluded table in the back, a man sat alone, a silhouette against the rain-streaked window, staring out into the storm. He was the only customer left. A waiter approached her, his expression a mixture of politeness and professional impatience. "I'm sorry, miss," he began, his voice a soft, apologetic murmur. "We're about to close for the night." Desperation, cold and sharp, clawed at Emily's throat. She couldn't go back out there. She couldn't. She opened her mouth to plead, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. The bell above the door chimed again, a sound that made her blood run cold. It was David. He stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the polished floor, his handsome face twisted into a mask of possessive fury. His eyes scanned the room and landed on her, a predator locking onto its cornered prey. "There you are," he snarled, taking a step inside. "You thought you could run from me." Panic seized her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. There was only the staff, the exit he was blocking, and the stranger in the back, the man who was her only impossible chance. In a move, fueled by pure, primal terror, she turned away from David. Her legs, trembling and weak, carried her across the room toward the silent stranger. He looked up as she approached, his eyes, a cool, unreadable gray, showing a flicker of surprise. She stopped at his table, her hands shaking so violently she clasped them together to still them. "Please," she whispered, her voice a broken, desperate plea that was barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Pretend you're with me." Liam Jackson didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even blink. The moment her desperate whisper reached him, he moved. In a single, fluid motion, he rose from his chair. His hand came to rest on the small of Emily's back, a gesture of calm, possessive ownership. He gently but firmly pulled her to his side, tucking her into the protective space of his body. The warmth of his hand seeped through her rain-soaked dress, a shocking, solid point of contact in her chaotic world. "Sorry I'm late, darling," he said, his voice a smooth, low baritone that cut through the tension like a knife. He looked directly at Emily, his cool gray eyes holding hers for a fraction of a second, a silent command to play along. Traffic was hell. David stopped dead in his tracks, his furious advance halted by confusion. "Emily, who is this?" Liam finally turned his gaze on David. It was a look devoid of heat, a cold, empty stare that promised a capacity for violence far more terrifying than any loud threat. It was the look of a man assessing an obstacle that he could remove with absolute ease. "She's with me now," Liam said, his tone flat and final. "And you're interrupting our dinner." The quiet, unshakable authority radiating from Liam was a force David had clearly never encountered. Accustomed to being the predator, he was suddenly faced with an apex one. He took an involuntary step back, his blustering anger deflating into uncertainty. But Liam wasn't finished. He didn't order David out. He did something far more unnerving. He gestured to the empty chair at the table. "Sit down, David," he invited, the words a silken command. "Let's clear things up." It was a terrifying power play. David, compelled by a fear he didn't understand, numbly sat. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Liam remained standing, a towering, calm presence beside Emily, his hand never leaving her back. He began to question David, his queries subtle, almost casual, yet each one was a precision tool, expertly extracting information. He learned about David's obsession, the length of his harassment, the nature of his threats, all while maintaining the flawless charade of a concerned partner discussing a nuisance. Emily stood frozen by his side, a pawn and a protected queen, in a game she couldn't comprehend. After 10 excruciating minutes, Liam seemed satisfied. He gave a curt nod. "I believe we're done here." David, thoroughly dismantled and humiliated, scrambled from the chair and fled the restaurant without another word. The silence he left behind was profound. Liam finally released her, and the absence of his touch was as jarring as its presence had been. He looked down at her, his face once again an unreadable mask, but his eyes held a new, calculating light. "He won't give up," Liam stated, the words a cold, hard fact. "Men like him never do." He held her gaze, and she felt like he was seeing every one of her fears, every corner of her trapped existence. "The lie you started tonight," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur. "We'll have to keep living it, until he's no longer a problem." Emily stared at him, the adrenaline from the confrontation with David slowly being replaced by a chilling confusion. "Keep living it?" she repeated, her voice still trembling. "What does that mean?" Liam slid back into his chair, gesturing for her to take the one opposite. Numbly, she obeyed. "It means that for a man like David, a single defeat isn't enough," Liam explained, his voice a calm, clinical assessment of the threat. "His ego is wounded. He'll retreat, he'll watch, and he'll wait for an opportunity to prove he can still get to you. The only way to make him stop, to make him truly believe he has lost, is to make our relationship seem real, inescapable, permanent." He laid out the cold, brutal logic of the situation. It wasn't a contract. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He framed it as a strategic necessity, a consequence of the choice she had made when she approached his table. "You will be seen with me," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "I'll drive you home. I'll pick you up. I will become a constant presence in your life. To the outside world, to him, we will be a couple. It's the only way to build a wall around you that he won't dare to climb." The implication was staggering, but it was the unspoken rule, the impossible core of the arrangement, that made her breath catch. The rule was the lie itself. "We have to be convincing," he stated. It was an impossible task. To be convincing, they would have to feign an intimacy that would inevitably blur the lines between performance and reality. Every public touch, every shared glance, every quiet moment would be part of the act. It would become impossible for her, and for him, to distinguish what was real from what was a carefully constructed charade. The very thing meant to protect her would trap her in a new, more complex kind of uncertainty. Liam paid his bill and escorted her out of the now empty restaurant. The rain had softened to a light drizzle. A sleek black car was parked at the curb, a driver standing silently by the door. The ride to her modest apartment building was steeped in a thick, unspoken tension. As they turned onto her street, Emily's heart leaped into her throat. Parked across from her building, its headlights off, was David's car. A dark silhouette sat in the driver's seat, watching, waiting. Liam saw it too. He didn't react, his expression unchanging. He pulled the car to the curb directly in front of her building and killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of the rain on the roof. "The show continues," he whispered, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. He turned to her. His gray eyes, unreadable in the dim light, held hers for a heart-stopping second. Then, he leaned in. He kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate, and breathtakingly convincing kiss, performed for their audience of one across the street. His lips were firm, expert, moving against hers with a practiced confidence. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin in a gesture of tender possession. It was a perfect performance. Too perfect. When he pulled away, they were both breathing a little faster. The kiss, meant only as a move in a strategic game, had felt dangerously, undeniably real. And in the charged silence of the car, they both knew that the lines had already begun to blur. The next morning, Emily woke to the harsh reality of her new arrangement. The memory of the kiss, of its calculated precision and its unexpected heat, lingered like a phantom on her lips. When she went down to her car to drive to a client meeting, she found it. The front right tire was completely flat, the rubber sagging around the rim. In the center of the tread was a clean, deep puncture. It wasn't an accident. It was a message from David. "I can still get to you." A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed Liam's number. He answered immediately. "What is it?" His voice was calm, expecting her call. "My tire," she stammered, her voice shaky. "It's been slashed. He was here." "Stay where you are," Liam commanded. "Don't go back to your apartment. Wait on the street. Someone is on their way." The line went dead. Less than 20 minutes later, a nondescript black sedan pulled up. A large, quiet man got out, nodded once at her, and proceeded to change her tire with an efficiency that was both impressive and unnerving. As he tightened the last lug nut, he handed her a set of keys. "Mr. Jackson's instructions," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "This is your car for now. It's armored, and a vehicle will be posted on this street 24/7. You won't be bothered again." He took the keys to her old car and drove it away, leaving her standing on the curb with the keys to a bulletproof sedan in her hand. The speed and totality of Liam's response was terrifying, but she couldn't deny the powerful, addictive feeling of safety that washed over her. That evening, he picked her up for their second performance. "There's a charity gala at the museum," he'd said over the phone. "A perfect place to be seen." When he arrived, he handed her a garment bag. Inside was a stunning, elegant black gown and a velvet box containing a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace. "You need to look the part," was his only explanation. Walking into the gala on his arm was like stepping into another universe. The cavernous marble-floored hall was filled with the city's elite, politicians, judges, and titans of industry. And all of them treated Liam with a profound, almost fearful reverence. They approached him cautiously, their smiles a little too bright, their handshakes a little too quick. She realized with a jolt that he wasn't just a businessman. He was a king in his own court, and these powerful people were his subjects. The illusion of their budding romance was shattered by a man named Marco Valenti, a rival of Liam's whose smile was as sharp and dangerous as a shard of glass. He approached them, his eyes raking over Emily with a dismissive, predatory gaze. "A new acquisition, Jackson," Valenti purred, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Let's hope she's more durable than the last one." The threat was veiled, but its meaning was brutally clear. The air crackled with a sudden, lethal tension. Liam's arm, which had been resting lightly on her back, tightened, his fingers digging into her side in a possessive, protective grip. His body went rigid, and the charming facade he had been wearing all night vanished, replaced by the cold, dangerous stillness she had seen in the restaurant. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She had run from the petty, pathetic danger of a jealous ex-boyfriend. But in her desperate plea to a stranger in a quiet restaurant, she had inadvertently thrown herself into an ocean of sharks, where the dangers were far greater, and the stakes were life and death. After Valenti's veiled threat, the atmosphere of the gala became suffocating. Liam's charming performance was over, replaced by a cold, watchful vigilance. He cut their evening short, his hand never leaving the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd and out into the cool night air. His driver was waiting, but as they settled into the plush leather of the back seat, he didn't give the driver her address. "Home," was his only command. "You can't take me to your house," Emily said, a new knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "David knows my address, but he doesn't know yours. That's the one place I'm safe." "You're not going back to your apartment tonight," Liam stated, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "Valenti knows who you are now. Your building is no longer secure. You'll stay with me." Liam's penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel floating at the top of the city, a silent, minimalist kingdom that looked down on the world below. The space was magnificent, breathtaking, and utterly devoid of life. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves, no personal trinkets or clutter. It was the immaculate, soulless home of a man who connected with nothing and no one. It was the home of a ghost. He led her down a long, white corridor to a guest suite. "You can stay here," he said, his tone once again distant and professional. "My rooms are in the west wing. You won't be disturbed." He turned to leave, but Emily, unnerved by the cold emptiness of the place, spoke. "Thank you, Liam, for tonight." He paused in the doorway, his back to her. "I'm not protecting you because I'm a good man, Emily," he said, his voice low and harsh. "Valenti threatened you to get to me. You are now a reflection of my reputation. An attack on you is an attack on me. This is business." He left without another word, leaving her alone in the beautiful, sterile room. His words were a cold, deliberate splash of water, a reminder of the rules of their game. She was not a person to him. She was an asset, a strategic position to be defended. Sleep was impossible. The silence of the vast apartment was more deafening than the noise of the city. Restless and on edge, Emily slipped out of her room and began to wander through the dark, moonlit space. She drifted past the living area, the kitchen, the home gym. It was at the end of a long, unmarked hallway that she found it. A single, closed door. Unlike the others, this one was locked. Her curiosity, a small, persistent flame in the darkness, got the better of her. The lock was simple, not a high-tech security measure. She remembered seeing a set of old-fashioned keys in a decorative bowl on a console table. On a hunch, she retrieved them. The third key she tried turned smoothly in the lock. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and disuse. It wasn't an office. It wasn't a safe room. It was a music studio. Dust covers draped the furniture like shrouds. In the center of the room stood a magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface clouded with a thick layer of dust. On its music stand, a single sheet of manuscript paper sat yellowing with age, covered in a flurry of elegant, handwritten notes. A composition, frozen in time. She stepped closer, her fingers tracing the title written at the top of the page. Sonata for Isabella. This was his secret. Not a hidden cache of weapons or a ledger of illicit dealings. It was a room full of ghosts, a shrine to a lost love, a lost art. This was the heart of the ghost who haunted this empty fortress. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Liam stood in the doorway, his face a mask of devastation. The cold, controlled Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man who looked utterly, completely broken. "No one comes in here," he said, his voice not angry, but hollow, a whisper of profound, soul-deep pain. "This place..." It died with her. The silence that followed his words was heavier than the dust in the air. Liam stood frozen in the doorway, his carefully constructed armor shattered, leaving him exposed and raw. Emily felt like an intruder who had stumbled upon a sacred secret tomb. She expected him to be furious, to lash out at her for violating his privacy. Instead, he just looked, lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I shouldn't have..." He didn't seem to hear her. He walked past her as if in a trance, his gaze fixed on the piano. He ran a hand over the dusty lid, his touch full of a reverence that was painful to watch. The tension between them for the next hour was a palpable, agonizing thing. He retreated back into his shell, becoming even more distant and unreadable than before, ashamed of his moment of unguarded grief. Emily, wanting to retreat herself but feeling a strange new sense of responsibility, knew she had to do something to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. She walked back into the music room. He was still in there, standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. Hesitantly, she approached the piano. She had taken lessons as a child, a luxury her parents had insisted on before their finances had dwindled. She was rusty, but the muscle memory was still there. With a trembling hand, she lifted the dusty cover from the keys. She sat down on the bench, her heart pounding. She looked at the sheet music, at the beautiful, heartbreaking melody of the Sonata for Isabella. Taking a deep breath, she placed her fingers on the cool ivory and began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, clumsy, but they filled the dead, silent room with a fragile, melancholy sound. The melody was one of longing, of a love so deep it was inseparable from pain. Liam turned from the window, his head snapping toward the sound. He stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something else she couldn't decipher. He didn't stop her. As she continued to play, he walked slowly to the piano and sat down on the bench beside her. For a moment, he just listened, his eyes closed. Then hesitantly, his own fingers found the keys. He picked up the melody where she struggled, his playing fluid and powerful, filled with a skill that spoke of years of practice and a pain that spoke of years of silence. "Isabella," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp as they played. "She was my wife, a concert pianist. This was her world." He looked down at the keys, his hands never faltering. "There was a car accident 5 years ago. It wasn't an accident. It was a message from a rival, the same one who owns Valenti. The music was their only conversation." He played a dark, complex chord, and she answered with a soft, simple harmony. He was revealing the story of his life, not in words, but in notes. The music was his confession. "I haven't touched a piano since her funeral," he admitted, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. The improvised duet swelled, a conversation of shared sorrow and a fragile, emerging hope. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, the music softened, the notes fading until only a single, soft chord hung in the air. They stopped playing. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of the music, with their shared vulnerability. They sat side by side on the piano bench, the proximity more intimate than any touch they had ever shared. His shoulder brushed against hers. She could feel the warmth of his body, hear the soft sound of his breathing. He turned his head slowly to look at her, his gray eyes, once so cold and distant, now dark and turbulent with a storm of resurrected feeling. "I haven't felt anything in 5 years, he whispered, the words more a confession to himself than to her. "Why do I feel something now?" His question hung in the air between them, a fragile, terrifying confession. Emily had no answer to give him. She could only meet his gaze, her own heart echoing the same confused, undeniable truth. The space on the piano bench, charged with 5 years of his unspoken grief and a few weeks of their shared pretense, had become the most honest place in the world. The moment was broken by the first rays of dawn, filtering through the large studio window and painting the dusty room in soft shades of gray and pink. The spell was shattered. Liam pulled back as if burned, standing abruptly from the piano bench. The mask of the cold, controlled leader slammed back into place, but she could see the cracks. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice once again strained and formal. He wouldn't look at her. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the ghost of the music and the echo of his whispered question. The next few days were a study in agonizing tension. They continued their public charade, a performance that was becoming both easier and infinitely more difficult. In public, he was the attentive, possessive partner. His hand would rest on her back, his fingers occasionally tracing a small, almost imperceptible circle, a secret touch in a public space that sent a jolt through her every time. They would share looks across crowded rooms that were meant to convey devotion to their audience, but instead communicated a deep, shared secret, that only they understood. The lie was becoming their only truth. The moments they were performing were the only times they could be close, the only times they could touch. The fake relationship had become a shield for their real, burgeoning feelings. The true danger of their situation became clear at a high-stakes poker game Liam hosted for a select group of the city's most powerful and dangerous men. It was a business meeting, disguised as leisure, and Emily's presence as his partner was non-negotiable. She was part of his armor, a symbol of a stable, settled life. She sat on a sofa slightly behind him, a silent, beautiful prop, while he played. The air was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken threats. David, her ex, was a pathetic, distant memory compared to the cold-blooded predators in this room. During a break in the game, Valenti, the rival from the gala, approached her while Liam was in a hushed conversation across the room. "You play the part well," Valenti said, his voice a low, venomous purr as he stood over her. "The loving girlfriend. But you should know, Jackson has a habit of losing the things he cares about. His wife. His music. It's a pattern." Emily's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. Valenti smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "Don't you? Ask him what happened to Isabella's favorite violin, the one she was meant to play at Carnegie Hall." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He keeps his treasures locked away, but sometimes the locks break." Just then, Liam returned. He saw Valenti standing over Emily, and a look of pure, lethal fury crossed his face. He didn't say a word. He simply placed a hand on Valenti's shoulder, his grip clearly like iron, and steered him away. A few minutes later, Valenti left the party, his face pale, his composure shattered. Liam came back to her, his expression a grim, unreadable mask. "What did he say to you?" he demanded, his voice low and tight. "Nothing," she lied, not wanting to add fuel to the fire. "He was just making small talk." Liam stared at her, his gray eyes searching hers, knowing she was lying but not pushing. He reached down and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it, a gesture that was both reassuring and possessive. "Stay close to me," he commanded softly. She nodded, her heart aching. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was no longer just pretending. She was genuinely afraid for him. The lie they had built to protect her from a simple danger had now become a cage for them both, and the real monsters were circling, drawn to the beautiful, dangerous harmony they had started to create. David watched from the shadows of his ruined life. He had lost his job, his reputation, and the woman he saw not as a person, but as a possession that had been stolen from him. His obsession, curdled by humiliation, had festered into a singular, pathetic goal: to hurt Emily, and to hurt the man who had so effortlessly taken his place. He started following them, a ghost haunting the edges of their new life. From a distance he saw the public displays of affection, the shared glances, the easy intimacy. He didn't see a performance. He saw a genuine relationship, and the sight of it fueled his rage. He knew he was powerless against a man like Liam Jackson, but he also knew that even kings had enemies. He made a desperate, foolish call. He reached out to Marco Valenti. Valenti, still smarting from his own public humiliations at Liam's hands, was intrigued. He met David in a grimy, back-alley bar, a world away from the gilded rooms they both usually frequented. David, pathetic and eager, laid out everything he knew about Emily. He told Valenti about her quiet life, her modest apartment, her freelance work. And then he told him the one thing that mattered. "She has a sister," David sneered, savoring the piece of information like a trump card. "Sarah, younger. They're all each other has. Emily would do anything for her." A slow, predatory smile spread across Valenti's face. He had been looking for a new angle, a new piece of leverage. Threatening Emily directly had only made Liam more protective. But her sister, an innocent civilian target, that was a different kind of weapon entirely. It was messy. It was cruel. It was perfect. A week later, Liam and Emily were enjoying a rare, quiet evening in the penthouse. The show was off. They were just themselves, sharing a bottle of wine, the city lights glittering below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The conversation was easy, the silence comfortable. The line between their pretense and their reality had effectively ceased to exist. Liam was telling her a story about his childhood, a rare, unguarded moment of humor lighting up his usually serious features. He was more relaxed, more open than she had ever seen him. He was happy. The sight of it filled her with a warmth so profound, it almost made her ache. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it, his smile slowly fading as he read. The message contained a single, grainy photo. It was a picture of a young woman with Emily's same warm eyes, walking out of a university library, books clutched to her chest. It was her sister, Sarah. Beneath the photo was a simple, chilling line of text. I took your last treasure. Seems only fair I take your new one. But let's start with her family. You have 24 hours to declare war on the Antonelli family. If you don't, the girl in the picture pays the price for your peace. The message was a diabolical trap. The Antonellis were a neutral, powerful third party. An unprovoked attack would shatter the fragile peace in the city's underworld, forcing Liam back into the role of the ruthless, warring monster he had been trying to escape. It would isolate him, make him enemies on all sides, and prove to everyone that his relationship with Emily had made him reckless and weak. Valenti wasn't just threatening Emily's sister. He was threatening to destroy the man Liam was trying to become, using the ghost of the man he used to be as the weapon. And he had given him an impossible choice: start a war or sacrifice an innocent life. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The warm, relaxed man Emily had been sharing a bottle of wine with vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous stranger. The light in Liam's eyes died, leaving behind the flat, hard gray of polished stone. He stared at the phone, his body going rigid, the muscles in his jaw clenching in a sign of tightly leashed fury. "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice laced with a sudden fear. "Liam, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her, presenting a wall of impenetrable silence. He was no longer her partner in a fragile, budding romance. He was the Mafia boss, retreating into the cold, solitary fortress of his own mind to plan a war. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Liam became a ghost in his own home. He was there, but he was gone. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his voice was clipped, distant, his eyes looking straight through her. He was constantly on the phone, his conversations low, guttural, and in a dialect of Italian she couldn't understand. Men she had never seen before, men with hard faces and cruel eyes, came and went from the penthouse at all hours. He was shutting her out, and the coldness was more painful than any physical blow. She tried to reach for him, to break through the wall he had erected, but he was unreachable. "Talk to me, Liam," she pleaded one night, cornering him in the hallway. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." He stopped and looked at her, and his expression was so cold, so devoid of the warmth she had come to cherish, that it made her flinch. "There is no we in this, Emily," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "This is my world, my problem. You have no part in it." He was lying. She knew he was lying. He was protecting her, pushing her away to keep her safe from whatever storm was gathering. But his methods were cruel, and her heart, already so bruised by past betrayals, couldn't tell the difference between protection and rejection. Driven by a desperate need to understand, she did something she knew she shouldn't. She decided to follow him. The next evening, after he left the penthouse with a terse, "I have business," She slipped out and took a taxi, keeping his black sedan in sight from a safe distance. He didn't go to a restaurant or a nightclub. He went to a desolate industrial park on the edge of the city. From the shadows, she watched as he met with a group of his most trusted men. They stood under the harsh glare of a single sodium lamp, their faces grim, their voices low and urgent. She saw them unfurl a blueprint on the hood of a car. She saw one of the men open a trunk, revealing a cache of sleek black weapons. She saw them planning a war. Her heart shattered. The man who had played the piano with her, the man who had whispered about a future in the light, was gone. All that was left was the monster. The lie was over. He had used her, played his part, and now he was discarding her to return to his life of violence and death. Every moment of tenderness, every shared secret, every fragile hope, it had all been part of the performance. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent in the cold night air. She backed away into the darkness, the sound of her own breaking heart the only thing she could hear. She was waiting for him when he returned to the penthouse in the early hours of the morning. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the darkness of the vast living room, a lone, silent figure staring out at the city lights, her heart a hollow, aching void. He walked in, not expecting her to be there. He stopped when he saw her silhouette against the window. "Emily? What are you doing up?" he asked, his voice laced with a weariness she would have once found endearing. Now, it just sounded like the fatigue of a man returning from a world she could never be a part of. She stood up and turned to face him, letting him see the tear tracks on her face, the raw pain in her eyes. "The lie is over, isn't it, Liam?" she said, her voice surprisingly steady, hardened by the agony of her discovery. "You can stop now. You can stop pretending that you care." He froze, his face a mask of confusion and a flicker of something else. Guilt. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Tonight, at the industrial park. I saw the guns, the plans. I saw the man you really are." She took a shaky breath, the dam of her composure beginning to crack. Was any of it real? The music, the conversations, or was it all just part of the game, a performance to keep your asset compliant until you got tired of playing? He had a choice. He could tell her the truth, about her sister, about Valenti's trap, about the impossible choice he was facing. He could let her in. But in his mind, telling her the truth would be painting a target on her back, dragging her deeper into the danger. The only way to truly protect her, he believed, was to make her hate him, to make her run so far away that she would be clear of the shrapnel when his world inevitably exploded. He chose the cruelest path. He chose to become the monster she believed him to be. His expression hardened, the brief flicker of guilt replaced by a mask of cold, dismissive indifference. "Pretending?" he said with a short, humorless laugh. "Of course it was pretending. That's what we agreed to, wasn't it? A performance to keep you safe." He took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a cruel, cutting whisper. "The game is over, Emily. You're safe now. You can go back to your life." Every word was a dagger, expertly twisted. He was using their agreement, the very foundation of their connection, to invalidate everything that had grown between them. He was making her feel like a fool for believing any of it had been real. It worked. Her heart, which had been cracking all night, finally shattered. The pain was so immense, so absolute, that it turned into a cold, numb certainty. "Fine," she whispered, the single word a flag of surrender. She turned and walked toward the guest room, her movements stiff, robotic. She packed her few belongings into a small bag, her hands moving on autopilot. She was desolate, but she would not let him see her cry again. As she walked toward the front door, her bag in hand, one of Liam's most trusted men, a quiet older man named Sal, who had always treated her with a gentle respect, was standing guard in the foyer. He saw the dead, empty look in her eyes, the bag in her hand, and the rigid, pained posture of his boss watching from the living room. Sal, a man who had served the Jackson family his entire life and who had seen his young boss destroyed by grief once before, made a decision. He broke the rules. He stepped in front of Emily, blocking her path to the door. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. "You can't go." "Get out of my way, Sal," she said, her voice hollow. "He's not abandoning you," Sal insisted, his gaze flicking for a second toward Liam, a look of profound disapproval on his face. "He's lying. He's going to war to save your sister." Sal's words struck Emily with the force of a physical blow. "He's going to war to save your sister." She stared at him, her mind reeling, trying to process the impossible statement. "My sister? What are you talking about? Sarah is fine." Sal's grim expression told her otherwise. He quietly explained everything. The text from Valenti, the picture of Sarah, the diabolical threat. He explained that Liam's coldness, his lies, his descent back into the darkness, it was all a desperate, clumsy attempt to push her away, to shield her from the war he was about to wage in her name. He wasn't rejecting her. He was sacrificing himself. The truth was a blinding, agonizing light. He had made himself the villain to keep her safe. The pain of his perceived betrayal was instantly replaced by a new, sharper terror. He was walking into a trap, for her, and she had almost walked away and let him do it. "Where is he going?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a new, fierce urgency. Sal hesitated, torn between his loyalty to his boss and the desperate plea in her eyes. He gave her a location, a derelict shipyard, Valenti's known stronghold. "He's going in an hour. Please, miss, don't make things worse." But Emily couldn't stand by and do nothing. While Liam was gathering his men, preparing for a war, she was formulating a desperate plan of her own. She couldn't fight Valenti with guns, but she knew David. She knew his vanity, his weakness. She called him. "I'll come back to you, David," she said, her voice a convincing mix of desperation and defeat. "I'll do anything you want. Just tell me where my sister is. I need to know she's safe." David, gloating and arrogant, fell for it completely. He saw it as his ultimate victory. He gave her an address, a different warehouse at the same shipyard, a place where Valenti was holding Sarah before the main confrontation. "He's keeping her here," David sneered. "Come alone, and we can watch the fireworks together when your new boyfriend walks into his own funeral." It was a long shot, a fool's errand, but she had to try. She went to the warehouse, hoping to create a diversion, to get Sarah out before the shooting started. But the moment she arrived, she knew she had made a terrible mistake. The meeting with David was a trap within a trap. Valenti's men were waiting. They seized her instantly. When Liam and his men stormed the main shipyard building, ready for war, they found it eerily empty. Then, a large screen flickered to life. It was a live video feed. On the screen, Valenti stood with a triumphant smile, and beside him, bound to chairs, were both Emily and her sister Sarah. "A change of plans, Jackson," Valenti's voice echoed through the empty warehouse. "It seems both of your treasures ended up in the same place. How convenient." Liam stared at the screen, his blood running cold. His plan to protect Emily had failed in the most catastrophic way possible. He had not only failed to keep her out of it, but he had led her right into the heart of the danger. "I'm a man of my word," Valenti continued, his voice dripping with sadistic pleasure. "I'll let you save one of them. A noble choice. The woman you love, the one who thawed your frozen heart, or her innocent sister, a girl who has nothing to do with our world. Choose, Liam. Who walks out of here, and who pays the price for your mistakes?" Liam was frozen, trapped in a waking nightmare. It was an impossible choice, a devil's bargain designed to shatter his soul. He had sworn he would never lose anyone again, and now he was being forced to choose who to sacrifice. Liam stared at the screen, at the two faces he had, in different ways, sworn to protect. Emily, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for herself, but for him. And Sarah, a girl he had never met, but whose life was now inextricably tied to his. The silence in the empty shipyard was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. Valenti's voice, dripping with sadistic glee, echoed from the speakers again. "Tick-tock, Jackson. Who will it be? The ghost of your future, or the ghost of her past? You can't have both." His men watched him, waiting for an order he couldn't give. His mind, usually a cold, calculating machine, was a maelstrom of impossible scenarios. Every strategic instinct screamed that this was a no-win situation, a perfectly designed trap to break him. He could save Emily, but condemn her to a life of guilt over her sister's death. He could save Sarah, the noble choice, but lose the only woman who had made him feel alive in 5 years. He thought of Isabella. He thought of the promise he had made to himself after her death, that he would never again be powerless. Yet here he was, more powerless than ever, his heart being torn in two by a man who knew exactly where to cut. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, shutting out the image on the screen. He shut out the tactical analysis, the strategic possibilities, the voices of his men in his ear. He focused on one thing, and one thing only, the sound of the sonata he had started to write again, the harmony, the balance. He opened his eyes. The agony was still there, but beneath it was a sliver of ice-cold clarity. "Fine," Liam said, his voice a low, rough rasp that carried to the microphone, picking up his audio. He looked directly into the camera lens, his gaze boring into Valenti through the screen. "I choose the sister," he declared, the words tearing from his throat. "Let Emily go." On the screen, Emily let out a choked sob, shaking her head in disbelief and horror. Valenti laughed, a loud, triumphant roar. He had won. He had broken Liam Jackson, forcing him to sacrifice his own heart for the sake of an innocent. It was the ultimate victory. "A noble choice," Valenti gloated. "I knew you still had a shred of that old-world honor in you." Liam stood motionless, his face a mask of stone, watching the screen as one of Valenti's men moved to untie Sarah's chair. He had made his choice. He had condemned himself to a future as empty as the 5 years he had just endured. He had lost. Liam's declaration, "I choose the sister," hung in the air, a sentence of his own damnation. On the screen, Valenti was basking in his victory, his attention focused on the noble sacrifice. He gestured for one of his thugs to begin untying Sarah. It was the moment of distraction Liam had been counting on. His choice was never a surrender. It was a feint, a strategic gambit designed to appeal to Valenti's ego and create a single, crucial opening. "Now," Liam spoke, not to the screen, but into his own comms unit. It was a one-word command that unleashed hell. The empty shipyard erupted. 2 of Liam's best men, who had infiltrated the second warehouse hours earlier disguised as city maintenance workers, burst into action. Simultaneously, a massive cargo crane outside, operated by another of his men, slammed a shipping container into the main power conduit of the building, plunging the room on the video feed into a split second of chaotic darkness. But Liam's true redemption wasn't in the plan's brilliance. It was in the person he had trusted to execute its most critical part. In the moment of darkness and confusion, as Valenti's men scrambled, Liam's voice came not through the speakers, but through a tiny, hidden earpiece he knew Emily was wearing, a piece of jewelry he had given her days ago. "The leg of the chair, Emily. It's loose. I saw it on the feed. Now." He was trusting her, not to be a victim, but to be a partner. On the screen, as the emergency lights flickered on, the scene was chaos. But Emily was no longer a helpless hostage. Fueled by adrenaline and Liam's trust, she wrenched the loose metal leg from her chair, and with a desperate, primal scream, swung it hard against the knee of the guard holding her. He buckled with a cry of pain. Her action was the final piece of the puzzle. It drew the attention of the men who were meant to be guarding Sarah. giving Liam's inside team the opening they needed to secure her sister, and it gave Liam the opening he needed. He was no longer watching a screen. He was already moving, his team storming the building from a secondary entrance. He burst into the room not as a strategist, but as a force of nature. He ignored the lesser thugs, his path a straight, lethal line to one man. He reached Valenti, who was just realizing his trap had collapsed. Liam didn't hesitate. He disarmed him with a brutal efficiency born of years of violence. But as he held his rival at his mercy, the man who had orchestrated his wife's death, he saw Emily's face across the room, her eyes pleading with him. He had the chance to end it, to take the vengeance he had craved for 5 long years. He looked at Valenti, then at Emily, then back at Valenti. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, but it wasn't aimed at Valenti's head. Liam had fired into the floor at his feet. "Vengeance is a ghost," Liam growled, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "It can't keep you warm at night." He slammed his fist into Valenti's jaw, knocking him unconscious. "But she can." He left his rival bleeding on the floor and walked toward Emily, his gaze leaving no doubt. He had chosen a future with her over the ghosts of his past. The aftermath was a blur of police sirens, flashing lights, and the quiet, efficient work of Liam's men cleaning up the mess. Sarah was safe, shaken but unharmed, and whisked away under the care of Sal to be reunited with her family. Valenti and his crew were handed over to the authorities, destined for a cold, quiet life behind bars. Hours later, back in the silent sanctuary of the penthouse, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving only the raw, exposed truth of what had happened between them. They stood facing each other in the living room, the city lights glittering below, a gulf of unspoken words separating them. "I don't want to pretend anymore, Liam," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm, breaking the silence. She had seen the monster, the strategist, the killer. But she had also seen the man who had been willing to sacrifice everything for her, the man who had trusted her to be his partner in the final, critical moment. The lie is over, and I'm still here. She took a deep breath, her heart in her eyes. "I love you." Liam looked at her, and the last of his carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. The cold, cynical Mafia boss was gone, leaving only a man who had been given a second chance at a life he never thought he'd have again. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "More than I thought I was capable of." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face, his touch gentle, reverent. "But love in my world is a dangerous thing, Emily. It puts a target on your back. I can't give you a normal life. I can't give you peace." He looked into her eyes, his own expression filled with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. He was offering her one last chance to escape. "I can give you anything you want. A new name. A new identity. Enough money to live comfortably anywhere in the world, safe and far away from all of this." He took a shaky breath, the words costing him everything. "I love you enough to let you go." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, a small, resolute smile on her lips. "I don't want a normal life, Liam," she said softly. "I want a life with you, dangers and all." She rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss that was not about performance or desperation, but about a clear and conscious choice. It was a kiss that sealed her fate and his. When she pulled back, she looked him straight in the eye. "But on one condition." "Anything," he breathed. "No more lies," she said, her gaze unwavering. "No more pushing me away to protect me. We face the danger together, as partners, in everything." 1 year later, the music room was no longer a dusty, silent tomb. It was the vibrant, beating heart of the penthouse. The dust covers were gone, the dark wood polished to a high shine, and the room was often filled with the soft, hesitant notes of a piano being brought back to life. Emily had convinced him to play again. At first, it was just for her. He would sit at the grand piano, his powerful hands moving over the keys, and the melodies that emerged were no longer just sad. They were complex, turbulent, but threaded through with a new, resilient strain of hope. He was still a man who walked in a dangerous world. The city's underworld still whispered his name with fear and respect, but the cold, empty core of him had been filled. His ruthlessness was now tempered by a purpose beyond power and control. It was dedicated to protecting the small, warm world he had built with her. This evening, he was seated at the piano, his fingers drifting over the keys. He was playing the sonata for Isabella, but the melody was different. He had finally written an ending. The final movement was not a somber adagio of loss, but a soaring, powerful allegro of rebirth and joy. It was a piece that acknowledged the pain of the past, but refused to be defined by it. Emily stood leaning against the doorway, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her pregnant belly. She was no longer the timid, frightened woman who had run into a restaurant to escape a monster. She was the calm, steady queen at the center of his empire, a woman whose quiet strength had brought a king back from the dead. He finished the piece, the final, triumphant chord hanging in the air. He looked up and saw her standing there, a soft smile on her face. "It's finished," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, his gray eyes, once so cold, now filled with a deep, abiding warmth as he looked at her. "It finally is." He stood up and walked to her, his hands coming to rest on her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of the new life within. "You brought the music back, Emily," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "You were always the music, Liam," she answered, her hands covering his. "You just forgot how to play." The lie that had started with a desperate, whispered plea in an empty restaurant had become the most profound truth of their lives. It had led them through the darkness, through the danger, and into this quiet, sunlit room. They were not a normal couple. Their life would never be simple. But it was real, and it was theirs. And as he leaned in to kiss her, the final notes of the sonata seemed to linger in the air, a promise of a love that was, at long last, complete.